Hello and welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum where all voices matter. I am pleased to have Quebec specialist Matthew Conway on the program today. He is a director for Quebec for Enterprise Canada and an active commentator on Quebec society and politics. Welcome to Boom and Bust.
Thanks, Tony.
I guess the
Good to
first,
be here.
oh, it's great to have you. And I guess the first question, just to educate our viewers a little bit, when is the next Quebec election and what are the issues going to be?
October 5th. So the official campaign should get started by the writ drop either very late in August or very early in September, depending on when the premier decides to make the actual call and the actual walk to the lieutenant governor. And the issues will be the last 8 years. It's essentially a referendum on the CAC and their leadership over the last 8 years, and obviously where Quebec's going. And the big man down in the States is never far away. So from the discussions, and I think, but people's pocketbooks are hurting right now, and I think that's also going to be an issue. Language and culture, as always, will always be present in any Quebec discussion and election.
Okay, so I hate to do the horse race thing, but obviously it's maybe at least part of the discussion anyway. So who's winning, who's losing, what's going on? What do the polls say?
Well, right now, so there's two things to consider when you're looking at the polls. The overall numbers, which we're in Canada, in English Canada, people are used to watching, but the real number to watch is the Francophone vote. So the Francophone vote obviously takes in consideration a lot of the votes in the regions, and those is what I call seat rich. And this elections are decided in regions in Quebec. For example, you've had in the past situations where parties have won the popular vote but actually lost the election in seats. What the case in point was 1998. Jean Charest, who had been brought in as the messiah to run against Lucien Bouchard's PQ, won the popular vote but lost, and the PQ won a majority government. And so this is a situation where the PQ at the moment has a sizable lead amongst the Francophone vote, and so that's a good omen for them in the regions. But there are a lot of places that we're looking at four-way races, and so it's not impossible that an MNA will be elected on October 5th with less than 30% of the vote in some ridings. In the competitive places, obviously the regions in the Quebec City area, and then so you might have a four-way race between the Parti Québécois, the Coalition Avenir Québec, the CAQ, the PLQ, the Quebec Liberal Party, and the Conservative Party of Quebec. So it's lots of close races. It's going to be a long night on October 5th.
Uh, the Coalition Avenir Québec, obviously that's the sitting government. There's been a change of leadership from François Legault to Premier Frechette.
Yep.
Has that changed the dynamics at all?
Probably not as much as
Mm.
they wanted. It's hard for any leader to come in and have to defend somebody else's bilan, as we say in French. It's a situation where Premier Fréchette, is trying as much as she can to distance herself from not only her predecessor as in the premier's chair, but also some of the decisions that were taken in the past on key economic files. But in the population, the CAC is the CAC. Even though officially this week it was announced that for the longest time, and it's a kind of a customary also on municipal level for municipal parties, where the leader's name will appear in the official name of the party on the ballot. So it used to be Coalition Avenir Québec, Équipe François Legault. Now it's Équipe Christine Fréchette, Coalition Avenir Québec. So they actually put her name before. Will it make a difference in people's minds? Some people seem to think so, but I think at the end of the day, it won't make much of a difference. That being said, campaigns matter here in Quebec. They have a life of their own. So what we people will be talking about on day one might not be what people will be talking about on October 5th. Case in point, 2007,
Right.
the ADQ came from behind. If that election, I still maintain, if that election was 1 week longer, Mario Dumont would have won a minority government
Interesting.
and been
Yeah.
premier of Quebec. He just ran out of runway,
Sure.
so to speak. So,
We're
so campaigns matter.
And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having a conversation with Matthew Conway. He is the Director Quebec for Enterprise Canada. Matthew, identity politics in Quebec has always been a big issue. You mentioned in your description that language is always an issue, those kinds of issues. But we're also getting now sort of what is Quebec society, because of new immigration and religious freedom versus the secular state. Can you sort of
Right.
get into that for our viewers as well, what that means in Quebec?
Well, it's always been the question of preservation of the French language. So, and a lot of people in certain nationalist who have nationalist tendencies or or French protection tendencies have a tendency to have in the past blamed immigrants for diluting the product or the French language. René Lévesque back in the day was the first one to say we actually should, speaking of the sovereignist movement, that they should, if they emulated the cultural communities and the Anglophones, that they, by just the sheer number of Francophones, they would have the ability to win a vote. So he wasn't a proponent of blaming immigrants and Anglophones for the failures of the sovereignist movement. But also, language takes a big thing. Is there's a perception, especially that the French language is getting a raw deal, not only in Canada because the demographics are going down, but also there's a perception in the regions that everybody on the island of Montreal speaks English and not a single soul speaks French. That if you go on to shopping on St. Catherine Street West, that you will get served in English. So perception becomes reality in people's minds, and parties keep tripping over each other, trying to come up with new ways to say we're the best party to protect the French language. And in some cases, a lot of times it comes up with business killing measures that do nothing to protect the French language, but just add more red tape and
Hmm.
paperwork and kill businesses. So it has the adverse effect. But yeah, it's been open season on cultural communities in the past, where I think it's also a situation where people not knowing where to find solutions, they are an easy target for certain people, certain parties.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, you mentioned the Parti Québécois, of course, and that also means that there could be a scheduled referendum on separation from Canada or sovereignty from Canada. Do you want to get into what that is looking like right now?
Yeah, so the PQ, it's their raison d'être. It's there have been polls in the past that have said if the PQ would win a crushing majority if they abandoned their promise of a referendum, and they won't do it. It would be dishonoring their faith, so to speak, by
Right.
doing so. It's why they're there. So yeah, they've been clear that they will propose a referendum and a question, and Quebec would go to the polls on a third referendum. If the Parti Québécois were to win a majority government. Now, even if they won a minority government, depending on who the different partners would be, I think there would probably be enough votes for them to get it passed. If you have enough Quebec Solidaire members that are elected, even though those two parties kind of take from each other. They are fundamentally a sovereignist party, so those members would be in favor, and they could probably pick off a few others. So at the moment, yeah, if the Parti Québécois wins, even if it's a strong minority, Quebec's looking at another referendum within the next 4 years, unfortunately.
There's not a lot of support right now, but could that change, do you think?
I think everything's possible. I mean, hearts and minds get changed by the slimmest thing. I think one parallel is that 1995, the yes forces were floundering, and Jacques Parizeau, then Quebec Premier Jacques Parizeau, named Lucien Bouchard as the bloc leader in Ottawa as the Quebec's negotiator in chief, and
Mm,
the more charismatic Lucien Bouchard took the proverbial bull by the horns,
right.
and some say a couple more days, and Quebec would have voted yes to separate. So
So
um,
nothing's for sure is what you're saying. Yeah.
nothing's for
Yeah.
sure, and we don't know what people are going to be saying in the rest of Canada.
Sure.
It only takes for lack of a better term, a bunch of yahoos to stomp over the Quebec flag to get people's passions going,
Sure. Sure.
and it ignites a powder keg, and yeah, and hearts and minds go with it.
And we're back here at Boom and Bust with my special guest, Matthew Conway, Director, Quebec of Enterprise Canada. Matthew, let's turn to federal politics in Quebec as well. Is Prime Minister Carney managing well in Quebec right now?
Well, if you look at the polls, he would actually probably win more seats right now, which is actually, to be honest with you, the conundrum of Quebec politics is the Parti Québécois leading the polls on the provincial level, the provincial side, and Mark Carney, who, for lack of a better term, is some people say he's bilingual. That's debatable. Essentially almost unilingual Anglophone.
Mm,
Winning the hearts and minds of Quebecers. So, it's almost like hedging their bets on both sides. But it's more also the fact is that on the provincial scene, but on the federal side, the bloc is not as strong as they used to be, as much as they try. And so essentially, Mark Carney is occupying space that's available to him,
mm.
and for lack of a better term, saying the right things and buying off writings. And But it's lack of competition, or lack of perceived competition from
Mm.
the other parties at the moment, and somebody has to occupy that space, and Mark Carney and the Liberals are doing it.
You mentioned President Trump earlier. Could you just expand a little bit on Quebecers' attitudes to President Trump and the impacts of his policies on Quebec?
Well, I think there's two schools of thought. Some Quebecers are saying that Canada as a whole is not doing enough to be able to counter what Donald Trump is, and also on the other side is saying that we are very vulnerable in any way, shape, or form, no matter what Quebec does, to the whims of the American president, and that the economies are so intertwined that no matter what happens here, it's whatever he decides in Washington will affect us all. But I think what another concern is also the negotiations, and what happens to cultural and language institutions, and just like the whole Netflix tax
Mm.
debate. It's there's a certain the CAC government has been very strong. Mathieu Lacombe, the Minister of Culture, on discoverability and being able to find Francophone content, and the big producers being the ones to fund it, whereas the United States are deathly against any tax whatsoever. So it's a kind of like who will win the tug of war in the end. But we are faced with a big economic behemoth, and Quebec at the end of the day has 9 million population total.
Right. So
Faced with Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So they feel, in one sense, distinct and safe from America, but they understand that there's, there's some impacts that could affect them. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're looking at 400 million Anglophones, so to speak, versus 9 million.
Yeah,
The ultimate David versus Goliath, as we all know, economics talks, and the buying power, and what wins out in the end. But it's a situation where the marketplace is 9 million people, as opposed to a marketplace of 350 down below
right.
below the border.
So let's talk economics for a little bit, Matthew. So the what would Quebecers grade the government of Quebec on their economic and fiscal policy right now?
Well, I think the previous premier François Legault and the former Minister of the Economy and Energy Pierre Fitzgibbon uh, bet hard on the battery file, and it's been a colossal failure if you look by any metrics at the moment. Their Northvolt being the big example where they, as for lack of a better term, went belly up. Lyon Electric as well, school buses. So it seems that there's news that coming out once in a while that some business that the previous CAC administration invested in is going bankrupt, and people are saying, well, why did you guys invest so much money into this particular thing? And industry, and Premier Christine Fréchette is trying to distance herself from even being in anywhere
Right.
around those decisions, while
Sure.
even though she was a member of cabinet. So
Matt, just
it's a
hold off.
situation where, yep.
Yeah, just hold off. We're going to take another break. We'll continue this discussion right after these messages. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having a conversation with Matthew Conway. He is the Director Quebec of Enterprise Canada. Matthew, we were talking about the economy and Quebecers' points of view on that. Could you continue with your analysis, please?
Yeah, no. So one of the things that I've noticed, and thankfully, I have a lot of non-political friends who I use as a focus group sometimes, and just to gauge their thoughts. And right now, when people go to the grocery store or buy anything in general, and they go in and they see the prices have gone up, the first person they blame is Donald Trump. So that blame has not gone into Mark Carney or the CAC government. That being said, for the provincial election, I think people, either people are in favor of change. They just don't know what change looks like.
Right.
But we're in a situation also in Quebec in the summer. Nothing much happens in the summer in Quebec. People have a tendency to take a lot of time off in the summer. Major media stars basically left their jobs to go on vacation, and they're only back in August. The 2 weeks, the construction holidays are the last 2 weeks of July in Quebec. So parties are announcing who's running and who's not running, but they're very short on major announcements. The people are taking a wait and see attitude right now, and only start paying attention in early September to the actual campaign. So people are not making up their mind, but I think there is a desire for change in the air, and essentially between the Quebec Liberal Party and the Parti Québécois to see who will incarnate that change. That being said, the Quebec Conservative Party will be strong in certain regions and the Quebec City area.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Let's talk a little bit about pipelines and resource development because there appears to be some changes, at least reported, on Quebecers'
Mhm.
attitudes to resource development and pipelines. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think people realize that so there's I have two schools of thought on that. One is if you actually went to on the street and asked people how many pipelines are under Quebec, a lot of people would probably answer none. There are hundreds. So that debate is kind of was, for lack of a better term, screwed up many years ago. With the shale gas debate, which
Mhm.
was completely bungled by proponents, and then basically lost the concept of the social acceptability. But I think people understand that we're not as much as some people want to electrify the grid and the cars were not ready yet. And
Mm.
actually, if Quebec tried to install to 2035 as the drop dead date, and I think people have come to realize that not only do we not have the enough electricity, even though with all the hydroelectric dams we have, we don't have the infrastructure ready and to get there. So, and especially in the regions. So we're in a situation where people are like, okay, what's next? And I think reality is starting to hit people. It's like, okay, well, we may not like oil, and gas, but we don't have a choice. And would we rather import it or let it through and get some economic benefits? So I think that's where the social acceptability debate is changing.
Well, you mentioned earlier that I guess the biggest economic blunder of the current government in Quebec is these EV battery plants and that kind of thing. Is there any lessons to be learned? I mean, Ontario invested in a lot of EV plants as well. It can't be going well if it's not going well in Quebec too.
Yeah, no, I think it's people it's what I call jumping on a bandwagon. It was the cool thing to do, and and everybody had their reasons for doing it. I think certain people, it was rushed, and I think the Quebec Auditor General came out and said, a lot of these projects were rushed and some due diligence wasn't done. So I think that's the lesson in the future is that you have to make sure that it's gonna yeah, it won't fail at the first sign of weakness.
Indeed.
And I think that's the lesson going forward.
Gotcha. Matthew Conway, it's been great having you on the program. Lots of interesting Quebec issues and personalities. We'll be watching very closely. Thanks for being on today.
Thanks for having me on, Tony.
That was Matthew Conway, Director of Quebec Enterprise Canada, talking about the political and economic situation in Quebec as something that people outside Quebec maybe should spend a little bit more time on. Very important province and important for the country. Thanks for watching today.